Is Naomi online?
Yes, she is.
Okay. Okay.
I feel like I didn't miss too much. The hardest part was just all the lines, which we have. But it is the hardest part.
Yeah, no. No, we forget to do these sometimes, but when people are out. But if you guys are out and we forget to do this, remind us. I'll make sure everybody else has access so that they can do it too. Everyone here? Yep. All right. Okay. So jQuery, we're gonna I'm just gonna kind of go over a high level what jQuery is, and then I think maybe with whatever time we have, we'll all just kind of go through some examples if we can. So jQuery it's big. There's a lot. We can't really go over every single element. We will focus specifically on Ajax, the Ajax part of jQuery this afternoon, since in today's kind of modern world we live in, that's really still one of the main, I think, main values that jQuery gives us still today. So, and then we'll, like I said, we'll kind of give you a high-level overview of some of the functionality that jQuery offers, and with whatever time we have left, we'll all just kind of go through some live examples, and everybody can kind of walk through some JS bins or something like that. But again, kind of like CSS, it's out there. There's docs. It's just one of those things. I think that as you have a need, you use it and you figure it out that way. But we're not going to cover it extensively. But anyways, jQuery has been a huge part of our lives since 2006, and so it is in fact legendary in terms of, I think, where the web was at that time versus kind of where it got to. It's kind of trailing off a little bit, but still very, very in use and very valuable. So jQuery is a popular JavaScript library that was first released in 2006. At that time, we kind of tell you about these painful times in our past. That was a painful time in our past, and we didn't have the tools. At the time, like I said, browser inconsistencies were just crazy. It was, you would get something working for one browser or one version of one browser, and it would not work in another browser. They had different APIs. You know, IE back in the day used to just do everything their own way, regardless of any standards. They would make up their own methods to do the same stuff. And to make a consistent interactive web application at that time around 2006 was and test it across all those versions was just it was just very, very, very hard to do. So yeah,
The Space Jam site looks so amazing.
yeah, that's, you know, yeah, it's no joke. That was, I mean, that was the time we were living in back then, and it was very, very hard. I think, you know, kind of people's understanding of JavaScript at that time, you know, it was just kind of this little scripting language in the browser, and everybody else was doing, you know, so much back-end server stuff. And so I don't think at the time people knew JavaScript well and knew the browser well. It was just these tools that were out there, and so the creator of jQuery, John Resig, he was just one of those guys that like went super deep into the language, was very smart, and he you know, he created this library that solved so many of these problems that all of, you know, us as just average developers just didn't know, or were doing the hard way, or, you know, all this kind of stuff. And it was freaking hard. So that's kind of where it came from. So what is jQuery? Well, jQuery is a library, first of all. It's not a framework. It is a library, much like what libraries have we already used? We haven't really used any Java, like underscore. Like underscore is a library, right? It doesn't give us the ability to build entire applications kind of out of the box, like we'll see with like Angular and crap. Like those are frameworks. These are just utilities, you know, that make our lives easier. They're just basically functions that we call for us to write less code. You know, somebody else wrote functions. We're just basically calling them. That's a library. So jQuery did 5 things very, very well. Is that they gave us single methods that targeted all browsers. So instead of writing for IE do this, for Firefox do this, for Safari do this, it was call one method, and under the hood, they took all the complexities out of it from somebody that actually knew better than we did. And that was a lot of code, a lot of time, and a lot of effort that was basically, you know, we didn't have to worry about it anymore. They introduced CSS selectors to query the DOM. You know, you guys have seen like query selector and query selector all now. We didn't always have those. We had get element by ID, get elements by tag name, you know, these very, very high level DOM query methods that weren't that powerful. And we had to write a lot of code to like traverse, to query the DOM effectively, and traverse and stuff like that. So that was a huge thing, introducing, you know, that as a, you know, the selectors as a means to query. And like we kind of talked this morning, the ability of our CSS to now match the structure of our HTML when we see those two worlds come together, like it makes a lot of sense. And so so that was cool. Chaining methods, which is, you know, the ability to call a method. You know, you guys have seen method chaining, right? One function, you know, is called, and then dot, and then another function. And so that was, you know, prior to the time, especially for me and anybody I knew, we were writing a bunch of, you know, functions that gave us output that we then called another function and got its return values and stuff like that. And it was, you know, it was a lot of work. It gave us simple methods for common repetitive tasks, meaning like, you know, how many times do you know, I mean, you guys see it all the time now. It's like the little, you click on something and it expands, you know, that, and you click on it again and it like contracts. That used to be a, you know, it was doable, but it was a good like 20, 30 lines of JavaScript. And again, you had to make sure that it worked across all browsers. And, you know, with jQuery, it was like dot hide, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, it's like, oh God, this is so easy. You know, like, so, you know, but that's the thing, you know, the web is such a copycat environment that, you know, somebody sets a standard for how, you know, how to build an application, everybody just copies it. And so this is where the web was going, and they made it very easy for us, so that was cool. And then the library was easily extensible. They actually thought about, what if people want to add their own behavior to this core library? And that alone, I think, was a huge thing in terms of jQuery blowing up the way it did. There were other similar frameworks or libraries that came out around that time, like Prototype and MooTools. And I think jQuery won out because of the way that it was extensible. And then all of a sudden you had so many developers writing jQuery extensions that it just turned into this massive ecosystem of everybody just using jQuery and jQuery libraries. It was crazy. And still very much out there. But so that's kind of what jQuery is. So, you know, with cross-browser compatibility, you know, to do something as simple as like bind an event, a function to a you know, a click handler, you know, you had to write your function here. You had to, you know, go get your element with this, like, you know, again, this kind of archaic or just not very expressive kind of query. You know, in like Firefox, you had a click event listener, i.e., you know, they couldn't do add event listener, they had to say attach event. They couldn't use click, they had to do on click, you know, like, so that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, was, you know, totally different worlds to get all browsers to do the same thing. And so jQuery kind of came out, and hello, welcome. So now we got, you know, jQuery came out, and all of that code turned into this. You know, we get, you know, we get a more expressive query, and just a single, you know, a nice way to bind an event, and you add a function, and you're on your way. And that was really cool. Like, and this is a very simple example. Like, the actual code we were writing previous to this was just, it was stupid. It was insane. We also got CSS selector queries. Kind of talked about that a little bit. So, you know, like an example here, if I wanted to kind of like find a span with a certain class name that as a child of a certain element, like, this is what I would have had to write. I would have had to kind of get the parent by its ID. I would have had to iterate over all the children. I would have had to compare the class name and the tag name and like all these things. Is this what I'm looking for? And then, you know, store a reference to that element to do something with it. You know, and then jQuery came along, and it was that. You know, it's like, it was great. So so yeah, it's like it's funny, like, well, I'll get to that, but you know, there's a lot more stuff out there, but, you know, I'll always remember jQuery well for this kind of stuff. Like, so jQuery, you know, just for reference, actually uses a selector engine called Sizzle. So you could actually use selector querying in another application if you don't want the whole of what jQuery is. So just kind of a side note to point that out. And again, we can now do this with query selector methods, which again kind of takes away some of the argument for wanting to use jQuery. But at that time, we didn't have that. It wasn't consistent. So chaining methods, again, instead of having, like, you know, these two functions and me having to go get my ID and then like call a function I wrote and pass it the element I found and then wait for it to do its thing and then call another function again with the same element to add a click handler. You know, I mean, this is a pretty common thing, is to, you know, add a class and add an event handler, you know. So again, now we got these, you know, the ability to query expressively and chain functions, and a single line of code, you know, adds, you know, quite a bit of capability. I wanted to show you guys this real quick. This isn't, jQuery magic for how to write functions. It was just a well-applied design pattern. I said object pattern. That should have said object design pattern. But if we look at this, this is all they did under the hood. Really was, we all know what this is, right? This is just an object. It's an object literal. Say, it could be a module. Same thing. It's just an object that gives us functions that we could call, right? And the key to if you ever want to write your own method chaining is that you have to have context of an object so that this works, and at the end of every function, you have to return the context. And so you can see here, if I just writing my methods this way to have context and return that context, that gives me the ability to write chain methods. This is all jQuery was doing, so it's not magic, but again, it was at the time we didn't know this stuff. It was a design pattern that he applied very, very well, and now you just see it everywhere. And so, again, for me personally, in my experience at that time, you just didn't see stuff like this. But it's really, it really just comes down to that. Simple methods for repetitive tasks. Again, this is what I would have had to write for, just to toggle, an element to be shown or not, or toggle its display. So I would have had to write, this function that checks, for a CSS property and then switches it, or whatever, and bind, an on-click handler to my HTML here, or do that in JavaScript, which would have added even more code up here in my top script. And then, with jQuery, it was, they gave us a toggle function. This is something that we do over and over and over again. Why should we have to, make it that complicated? So, 3 lines of code. Well, I mean, this could be 1 line of code if I really wanted to make it that way, but, much simpler. And there's tons of this stuff, adding classes, toggling, adding animations for events, just all, it goes on and on and on. But again, that was kind of what jQuery gave us that it did well. That was really just hard for us previous to that. So this is kind of like, again, we're not going to go into every method that jQuery offers, but this is at a high level, and this is taken from their API, so it's easy to match this slide with kind of the API docs. But these are kind of the top level things that the library gives you in terms of capabilities. So I'll kind of walk down these real quick, and just talk a little bit about them. So I don't have a lot of not a lot. I don't have any code examples for this stuff, but we'll try to do some live stuff if we can get through this presentation quickly. So Ajax we'll cover today. So I'm not going to say too much about that, because we will go into this more in depth. But Ajax methods are how we communicate with servers to get data, to talk to the server, basically send a request, get a response without the full page reload of the browser. That again was just a monumental shift in how we built applications for the web. And jQuery didn't invent Ajax. You can write Ajax applications with vanilla JavaScript, but they made it easy. And again, with simplifying repetitive tasks and kind of abstracting away, different the different APIs between browsers for writing applications that implemented Ajax. Attributes, with so much of our JavaScript interacting with simple API tasks or
No, I lost the feed.
oh, So yeah, so you see, you have a way to add a CSS class easily, a way to, get the current value of an attribute, see if an element has a class, get or set the inner HTML of an element, get properties of elements, remove attributes, remove class, remove properties, toggling like we saw, getting the values of inputs. And again, none of this is all that hard to do, but it's tedious, and it saves, it saves time. And so all of this was very helpful at one point in time, and it still is. But so that's what attributes were. Callbacks, we have, you guys have not completely seen the complexity of callbacks in applications, but you'll see more and more as we move forward. But our applications, we know, are asynchronous, and they they just, there's so much activity happening, and it's not this synchronous model of one line at a time. It's this asynchronous model of, things starting and coming back and telling us that they finished at a later point in time. So the callbacks API gives us a way to manage some of the complexity that comes with so many callbacks. I'm not going to talk too much about it because we haven't even really gotten into callbacks yet. But it allows us to, again, it saves us time for tedious and error-prone kind of tasks. And so, maybe we'll come back to that API when we get deeper into callbacks. CSS, just like attributes, we interact with our HTML elements often in terms of changing their styles and adding classes and, all that kind of stuff. Is that the CSS methods, they give us a way to kind of do this easily. So some of these overlap between, attributes and CSS, but you can figure out, height, inner width, offset, offset and outer height. These are all, where things lay on a page in terms of in the relation to the window. And again, these were all things that you could do fairly, or not fairly easily, that you could do with JavaScript, but they're not easy. They're tedious. And so getting the offset, getting the outer height and width, getting the position of something, all of these things, adding classes, taking classes away, again, just things that we have to do over and over and over again that just are, again, I'm just going to say tedious for like the 5 millionth time, but it's a pain. And you guys this morning is like, I know how to do this thing, but it's just taking me time, and that's annoying to me. So like, data, definitely you guys have seen this already, is that we, oftentimes we have a need to, especially Pixel Painter specifically, you guys saw this, is that we have a need to associate data with our elements to make meaningful applications. Is we have to know that, really this HTML element has some association with data in memory. And you guys saw it's kind of hard to manage that. Like, oh, I'm going to put an ID on my, or I'm going to put an integer ID on my element so that I know when this thing is clicked that it actually maps to this thing with an ID of 1. So therefore, it's like the first or the second thing in my array, right? I mean, you guys were doing stuff like that. So again, it's a complex task. It's an error-prone task. And the data methods give us an easy way to actually store data on, I say in quotes, on our HTML time. So it's not that it's creating like a physical tag that has our data. It's really just that jQuery is managing that complexity of saying this element at some time in the future, if I have a reference to this element, it has data bound to it. So I can say, give me the data that's bound, give me the object with properties or key value pairs that are bound to this HTML element. So look at that. Really, for data, most of the time, it's this data method that you use. So it's just what it says. Stores arbitrary data associated with matched elements. Key value pairs, that's how, you know, we see that with everything, right? That's just how we kind of store stuff. So we can actually get we can get existing data values on an element, or we can set data values on an element. So that's actually really cool. So here I can say, you know, right here in this example, on body, I can store a variable called foo with the value of 52. And at some point later, I can actually, you know, go retrieve what was that value of foo, right? So, so that's pretty handy. Deferred, jQuery calls it deferred. I'm putting promises up here because that's really what it is. Again, this is more of an advanced thing that we'll focus on specifically. So I'm not going to talk too much about it now. But like we were talking, you know, with managing callbacks, is that we live in this asynchronous world where things are not happening in order necessarily of how we read code. And that gets complex, and sometimes we need something to not happen until something else is done, and to write that can again be very tedious, not impossible, but tedious and error prone. And so promises are a huge thing now. So like I said, we'll get into it. It's an entire topic of themselves, but jQuery does have a solution. They do have a implementation of it, but it's not the best one. I don't even think it's close to the best one from what I know. So you know, if you're doing promises, generally there's better options, I think. But it's there. I think performance, right? Performance, and they don't implement the spec, right? 100%. I think that's why theirs is not recommended. Dimensions. With CSS, again, you'll see overlap in here, like dimensions and CSS, and have some of the same methods when you're looking at the jQuery stuff. They're not any different. It's just that they fall under the same categories. So, you know, if we look at dimensions, we see inner height, inner width. Again, these are the same exact functions that we saw in CSS, but they have a specific purpose. So, you know, on elements, we have padding on our elements. We have margin. If you haven't seen this already, you definitely will. I think probably everyone has seen this. Is like, I see this behavior on my page. I can't tell if it's padding. I can't tell if it's margin. Something is knocking something out of the way, you know, and you're like using, you know, File Explorer to kind of see, you know, draw the box to see what's happening. It's hard to see truly what, you know, we only see with our eyes what is visible, but we have these properties that make the size of our elements. So sometimes we want to know how big is the whole thing with padding and margin. How big is, you know, how big is just the inner content of my, you know, of my element. And so again, stuff you can do, it's tedious, and so we have a nice, you know, set of methods to deal with that. This is, you know, obviously one of the biggest reasons jQuery blew up and is a lot of the time. You know, we see all these things when we hover. It doesn't just flash from one color to another; it fades in, right? Like when we click on an accordion, it doesn't just expand automatically. It, you know, it has animation to it. So again, you know, that's not necessarily easy to write across browsers, especially back in the day. And so, you know, jQuery gave us a good API to animate transitions. And as well as, you know, sometimes we don't want something to happen until the transition is complete. And so they gave us, you know, a nice way to say, animate this thing, and when it's done, then do this other thing. And that was cool. That was very, very helpful. And slideshows and accordions and half the internet that you see today is really built around, I think, kind of what jQuery popularized. I wouldn't say that they were responsible for it, but they definitely made it more accessible, and that's why so much of the web looks like so much of the web. Events, we've seen this. It's so much easier to bind events, click handlers and hovers and mouse overs and keystrokes, and again, it all relates to user experience, and building software in the browser as opposed to building web pages in the browser. And so I'm not going to talk too much about that. I think we understand events fairly well. It just, like the example I showed over here, it just gave us an easier way to do it, wherever that thing was. Yeah, so on click just makes it much easier. Forms, one of our upcoming exercises, we'll get into forms more. Forms are a pain in the ass, and any library that makes that easier for us is cool. By nature, forms do a post to a server, or we haven't covered post yet, but they do a round trip to the server and reload your page. That's not very good, UI. You rarely see that on the internet anymore. And so sometimes we don't want that default behavior. We actually want to, handle it a little more graciously, or and kind of give people UX when they tab from one field to another or something like that. Tweak CSS properties and stuff like that. DOM manipulation. We've seen firsthand how tedious creating and removing elements from the DOM can be, and how common this behavior is. We do this all the time. We're creating elements, we're destroying them, and rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And the manipulation methods give us a broad set of functionality, again, that just makes common tasks more optimized and more concise. So we have we have all kinds of stuff. We can insert, stuff after other elements. We can append to elements. We can set attributes. And again, some of these are carryovers from other classifications, but same methods. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these, but as you guys go over this stuff, if you have questions about any of these, definitely, ask us. But I think it should be fairly standard. I think where you guys are at, you should be able to go into these docs and at least understand why you would use these, and then just have that in your tool belt. If I need to do something like this, I know where to go look. DOM traversal, again, very common task, but very tedious. Traversal methods provide an extensive set of methods for traversing the DOM and finding elements, not just finding elements, but finding elements in relation to other elements. And that's the key right there. That was very, very valuable, and something that was not easy to do necessarily with just native DOM methods. So jQuery does an excellent job of understanding this need and the shortcomings of the DOM API. And so it has things like you can apply, select the element, select something and the element that we're searching for, so we can kind of, the list of things that we got back from our queries. We get the children closest. Closest is one of the coolest ones that I've always liked, is that based on the element that I'm on, find an ancestor, the closest ancestor with a matching tag. So like, let's see, they probably have a better example to show that. So yeah, so like if I'm on this item element, or where are they? So their example, like I'm on this element, go find me the closest UL, which means it's gonna go kind of like traverse up the DOM level by level till it finds that matching element. And that was hard to do before, because you had to do like get the parent, check it, if that wasn't it, get the parent, blah blah blah, blah, and get into recursion and all that crap. So much easier to just say, give me the closest thing, and you get it. And you don't have to write, your own recursive methods, and then you have, parents. Very similar thing, but closest begins with the current element. But we used to have to do that all the time. It's like go up to some common ancestor and then go look back down into the DOM. And so we had this kind of up and down traversal, and Closest made that like super easy. That was a big like pain point. We get iterators for each thing that matches my query selector, do something. We get filters. We kind of can reduce, you know, you guys know what filter is. It's no different than our array filters. Get a big list of something, filter it down. Get things, only elements that have a certain descendant. So this is still one of, I think, the best APIs of jQuery, and reasons why I would choose to use it in a project. Some of the other ones have, you know, kind of lost some of their value. So that's it. That's at a high level, again, the classes of things that are in jQuery, and a lot of jQuery functionality is now offered through, you know, we have so many client-side frameworks now. Again, in 2006, we had none like this, or well, we had a handful, we had a few. Now we have just so many. You know, and I've seen guys that are doing like D3 in projects. Like D3 has selectors in it, so they don't need jQuery to do selecting. They use D3, you know, and so, and if you're building single SPAs, you know, single page applications, you don't need jQuery anymore because Angular does so much, or you know, or you know, what have you, whichever, you know, pick a framework. There's so many. So it's not the every tool. It's not the tool for every job now. It's the tool for the right jobs. But with over 60% of websites on the web still, and I think that's conservative. That was a number I Googled. Still using jQuery. When something is as widely adopted as jQuery was, it will live on for a long time because there's working applications that use it. And most people do not have the time and the money to totally overhaul working software. And so it's going to be around for a long time. And it's still a good tool. But you know, I do want to point out, as any tool, using it when it meets the needs of the application, not when it meets your needs as a developer. You know, your personal preferences is never the primary driver of architecting software. You know, it's picking the right tools for the job. You're the one that's responsible for making those decisions and factoring in performance and, you know, dependencies and how, you know, how large the size of the application is, all that stuff. So, you know, you're failing at your job if you're making some website that has, you know, 2 megs of dependencies. You're too lazy to write some vanilla JavaScript. Like that's not okay. But it, you know, again, if it's the right decision, and you guys will figure that over time. But if it's the right tool, use it, absolutely. But again, it's not the tool for you being lazy. It's the tool because it's the right tool. And I don't say you specifically, but it's a common thing. And you'll see like dependencies. I actually started to hate dependencies because people depend on them too much. They include some just bloated module to save them writing like 10 lines of JavaScript. And you know, that again just is not okay. Resources, there's jQuery and there's Stack Overflow. Like literally, you will find 8 billion posts on jQuery on Stack Overflow. So there was no need for me to look any farther for resources past that. Every JavaScript question on Stack Overflow has a jQuery answer, guaranteed. And a lot of very good answers in terms of jQuery itself. So, any questions on any of that? No? 9? Okay, so Ray got a cheat sheet. Here,
It's an overview kind of thing. So what's good about that site is that they list it in the way it interacts with you. So like events or
ooh, that's good.
and then you click on it and it
I'll add this to the end.
Guys updated it pretty well.
Does that make sense though? I mean, again, this is another one of those fairly quick presentations, and just tell you guys to start, using it. We'll use some of it today. I mean, but again, I mean, we could spend 3 days going over every jQuery method, and we're just not going to. But I'm happy to answer questions. And then we have about 20 minutes, so I can we can just start walking through. You can do some like JS bins or something like that. So I think let me throw up some markup here. Sorry. Let me place some HTML in the editor here. What's that? About that.
Tasty.
Yes, this is my shift element. You guys, if you want to throw up a bin, sorry, man. Got Naomi out there too, so I don't. She might be feeling your pain too. Nobody has any questions about jQuery at all. What's that? Oh, here's a good one, actually. You can add libraries here in what does it say, JS bin. So I'm going to add jQuery, and so I'm going to say. Oh, one thing I should point out, you don't see this too much anymore. There's another library called Prototype. They both decided to use the $sign in terms of loading up their or for people to reference their libraries. And actually, does this make sense? Does anybody know why this is $sign? Why this works? Like why we get to do like all this stuff? That help? That's it. No, trust me. You have no idea how long it took me to, even the chaining method, so like when I first saw that, I was like, whoa, what is this magic? And then you see, it really does boil down to they just use the language very smart and use very good patterns. But that's it, they wrote a bunch of methods, add, blah, add class. That's all it is. Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very simplifying, but conceptually, that's really all it is.
It's just a way to get into their content.
Yeah, that's it. And so, oh, but anyways, yeah. So we used to have conflicting. If somebody would add prototype and jQuery to a project, the like whichever one loaded last would win the race, and everything would break. So you can also reference it by jQuery. Both will work. So I mean, most of the time you see this, but yeah. And then a lot of time, actually, you'll see these things too. The like the iffy, or we'll call this $, and then you'll write like a bunch of jQuery, methods in here, blah blah blah, whatever, and then people will pass jQuery in like that. Is that the right syntax, right? Okay. Yes. So what they're doing is like they're saying, I know that potentially the $ could conflict somewhere, but I don't want to write jQuery for all my stuff. So what I'm going to do is kind of embed all my $ kind of jQuery-ish logic, and I'm going to inject the actual jQuery by name into here, and therefore I will never have a conflict because because this is scoped, and because even global scope, if prototype has $ at root, my parameter is going to take over, internal scopes of the function. So this is called dependency injection, but you see that a lot.
I'm sorry, what? So the function scope, like he's passing jQuery in there. Yeah. He's passing in an argument to that parameter. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So why doesn't that conflict with like a $? Would it like override like the proto side?
So if you have the $ already declared in the global scope, this creates a new scope for the jQuery's $.
Yeah, because this is a function. So here. I'm just breaking jQuery. So I should be able to yeah, see. So basically this is my variable that I'm passing in as an argument to this function, and so yes, outside of this function, the $ is in the global scope, but inside the function it's a parameter, so it overrides.
Okay, so whatever jQuery stuff you want to do, you do it inside of that iffy.
Yeah.
You don't have to write out jQuery.
Yeah.
Okay.
So see, outside of it, it's still it's still $, but I'm making like no mistake that I'm referencing jQuery, and somebody can't add prototype to my project and break all my jQuery stuff. So you don't have to do this, but you'll see it. If you do see it, that's what it is. That's what it means. This is called this is a mixin also, I believe. From like you'll see this in like that design patterns book we shared with you guys, or that we link to from time to time. But yeah. So again, if you see that kind of stuff, and you will, that's what it means. So let's see. Anyways, I'll just leave that there. It doesn't hurt anything. Oh, actually, I can't. I'm gonna break jQuery. Okay. So what did I want to do? I wanted to say on. Oh, document.ready. Over that. What am I doing? Instead of window onload, if you're using jQuery, you can do document.ready. Same concept, except that Document ready happens after all your assets have loaded and your DOM loads. So when it's going to fire just when it's done downloading, but like it doesn't mean that your CSS files have finished downloading or your images or any of that stuff. Document ready will make sure that like every requested resource for that page is there before this script runs. And again, something you could have done before jQuery, but it was kind of a pain. But there is a different window.onload does not equal document ready. They times. So you could use both of them in tandem if you wanted to. But so I'm going to say when this document loads, I'm going to solve anchor tag page. Go find this closest container. Let me make sure this actually works. But, and I'm going to add some IDs here. First. And when this thing runs, or this thing. Bar found bar target element. And console log target element. Yeah, I think this will work. So let me try this. Well, okay, getting close. Is it, do I have to invoke it? Or no? How do I get the ID right? Attribute? That probably works, yeah.
That would work too. Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh god. Wait. Ah, okay. There you go. Okay, cool. There we go. So, so you see what I did here is that, and this is exactly the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That did not take long to write. And what it is that it allowed me easily, you know, when the document loads, to bind a function to all of my links here, and not have to go through this huge song and dance of knowing, like, you know, to find out information, or you know, map data to stuff, or just, well, I forget I said all of that. When this thing gets clicked, it's very easy to, at that point in time, figure out where I am in this giant structure of HTML. And you'll see this over and over again when we're dealing with data. You know, Facebook has post after post after post after, and they're all the same HTML. But when one of those things gets clicked on, you know, how do you know where you are sometimes in this greater kind of, you know, landscape of HTML? And so this is a very easy way to say, go up, you know, where I am right now, go up to the closest container. And a lot of times what I would want to do here, or what I have done here, is I have like other HTML down here that I need to tweak, like when this thing gets clicked. So I can basically say, go up to some common parent that I know is there, or some common ancestor, and then go back down into this and do something else to another. So I could do that real quick. So I'll just say div class show alert. Okay. So see, if I try to target this div from my link here, like that's kind of gnarly, right? Like I have to go outside of an LI, outside of a UL, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I'm gonna add some alert on background color red. Hide that. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna get rid of this guy and say target element fine. This is also jQuery.
Closest looks outwards, John. The drag from where you want to go onto the tree. Closest you want to look into the tree, like the nesting. Fine.
Yep. Is that what I called my CSS? Alert on? Okay. So now I run this. Ooh. See? So easy. So, you know, this is kind of what I'm talking about, is that based on here, something that happened inside of a container, you know, I need to find something else inside that container based on that action. So, you know, this gives me the ability to do that with a very, very minimal amount of code. Like this is what, 5 lines? Like to write that without jQuery to target all browsers is like, you're talking probably, I don't know, if you're good, like 20, 30 lines of code probably at minimum. So anyways, unfortunately, I got to kind of wrap this up because I have to get to her school. So we're going to take an early lunch today. John will come down and do Ajax after lunch. Yeah, like I said, this is, you know, pretty quick. Let me share this link with you guys. And just like CSS, we just won't get away from it. So we will continue to use it in projects. And if you have any more questions, let us know. But
Internet Explorer just will move us along.
Okay, I'm gonna hang up on you, Naomi. Hope that was helpful.